The prairie wind howled that night, carrying with it the smell of dust, mesquite smoke, and the faint rattle of coyotes in the distance as the cowboy known only as. Luke sat on the edge of his porch, staring into the dark horizon, with the quiet patience of a man who had spent years alone beneath the endless skies of the West. His only companions the creak of his saddle, the sound of hooves, and the whisper of whiskey in a tin cup. He had long since grown used to loneliness, for though he had seen battles, driven cattle across states, and even dealt cards in frontier towns that rose and fell like sandcastles in a storm, Luke had never found a place or a person to anchor his restless spirit, and the locals, both the settlers and the tribes nearby, looked at him as an oddity, neither fully one of them nor completely apart. Just a drifting cowboy with no ties and no family, which was why when the men at the saloon, filled with laughter and mischief after too many bottles of cheap rye, decided to pull a cruel joke, they thought Luke the perfect target, for they knew he would not raise much fuss nor bring lawmen into it. So they made arrangements in hushed tones and with reckless grins, whispering among themselves about how they would send him 2 Apache sisters as a gift, thinking it would shame him, embarrass him, or at the very least give them something to laugh about the next day. But they did not know the weight of what they were about to do, for their joke would set into motion a story that would ripple far beyond their laughter and into the lives of the Apache sisters themselves, women of fire and dignity, who had been tricked into believing they were being sent for trade or safe passage, only to find themselves delivered like tokens to a man they did not know, a man whose life would forever change the instant they stepped onto his land. And that night when the wagon rolled quietly up to Luke's ranch, under the silver wash of moonlight, he stood up, hand hovering over his revolver, because strangers arriving unannounced after sundown never meant good news. But instead of armed riders or troublemakers, he saw 2 tall figures step down from the back of the wagon, their hair braided thick and long, their dark eyes sharp with suspicion and anger, their garments bearing the beadwork and patterns of their people. And before Luke could speak, the drunken driver snapped the reins and rode off, leaving behind the 2 sisters as though they were parcels, and Luke, confused, wary and already sensing the cruelty of some man's trick, lifted his hat and tried to speak. But the women stared at him as though measuring his soul, silent and proud, their chins tilted high, despite the insult of being abandoned at a stranger's doorstep. And for the first time in years, Luke felt words knot in his throat, for never had his quiet ranch been so alive, with the fierce presence of 2 women who carried themselves not as victims, but as warriors who had been forced into an unfamiliar night. He gestured toward the porch, muttering in his low drawl that they could sit and rest. But the elder sister, taller, with eyes that cut through the dark like twin flames, spoke in halting English, demanding to know why they had been brought here, and Luke, baffled and angered by the prank already, swore by his life that he had no hand in it, that he was as much a pawn in the saloon men's foolishness as they were. But the sisters did not soften, for trust was not given so easily, especially across cultures scarred by betrayal. Yet there was something in Luke's tone, a gravity and honesty that made them pause, and so they remained standing on his porch, refusing his offer of food or fire, until the night grew so cold the younger one, shivering though she tried to hide it, finally lowered herself onto the wooden step, her eyes never leaving Luke's. And so began the strangest night of Luke's life. For inside his small cabin, with its single bed, its table scarred with knife marks, and the smell of leather, tobacco, and old wood, he found himself in the presence of 2 proud women who seemed as out of place in his world as he surely seemed in theirs. And though he wanted to demand answers from the fools who had orchestrated this, all he could do was offer the sisters a roof for the night, swearing he would take them wherever they wished come morning. But fatigue and the quiet weight of fate had other plans, for as the hours stretched long and the fire burned low, Luke saw the sisters finally accept cups of water, then blankets he laid out on the floor, their distrust still sharp but dulled by exhaustion. And when sleep finally crept over the cabin, It was not with the peace of familiarity, but with the strange, electric tension of lives thrown together by forces neither of them had chosen. And as Luke lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the even breathing of the sisters on the floor below, he could not shake the thought that this was no simple prank, but the beginning of something that would burn through every part of his solitary life like wildfire, something that might bind him forever to these women in ways he could not yet name. And as the night deepened into silence, the cowboy who had never belonged to anyone found himself whispering words he had never expected to say, that perhaps, by some cruel twist of fate, he had been given not mockery, not shame, but something far more dangerous, a glimpse of the family he never knew he was missing, a thought that clung to him as sleep finally claimed. His weary body and dawn waited with its inevitable revelations. The morning light spilled over the plains, and Luke awoke with a start, the weight of the night before still heavy in his chest. For there beside him were the two Apache sisters, their dark hair fanned out across his bed like rivers of night, their breathing soft and steady, as though fate itself had bound them there. And without thinking he whispered words that startled even his own heart. "My wives." Truth spoken before he had even understood its meaning. Yet it felt more real than anything in his lonely life. And as the sisters stirred, one meeting his eyes with unreadable silence, he knew there would be no turning back. For the prank the saloon men had played had become something larger, something alive, and over the next days they stayed. No longer just strangers, but companions in work and quiet meals, their pride unbroken, their presence reshaping every corner of his cabin, until Luke could no longer see his land without imagining them in it, moving through it with a strength and grace that steadied his restless spirit. But their father came as the elder had promised, riding across the horizon with warriors at his back, his eyes filled with fire and judgment, demanding to know why his daughters had been left here, demanding of Luke a choice no man could make lightly, for he could surrender them and live with emptiness, or he could claim them, protect them, and stand against the storm that such a claim would bring. And though Luke had been a wanderer his whole life, a man with no ties and no anchor, he found himself standing taller than he ever had, his voice steady as he spoke the same words he had whispered at dawn. "They are my wives." And in that declaration the world seemed to shift, the sisters watching him with surprise and something deeper, something that might one day become love, while their father measured his resolve, his silence heavier than any bullet, until at last he gave a slow nod, neither blessing nor curse, only the promise of trials ahead, and rode off with his men, leaving Luke, the cowboy who had been the target of a cruel joke, forever changed. For now he was no longer alone, no longer drifting. He had spoken his truth, and two proud women had stepped into his life, not as tokens of laughter, but as the beginning of a story that would burn brighter than the prairie sun itself, a story of love, defiance, and destiny carved into the untamed West. And dear listeners, if you've been swept away by this tale, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more stories of courage, love, and fate await you, and you won't want to miss the next chapter of adventure.